Good morning, beautiful people, and happy Friday. Today's story feels almost cinematic. New York Attorney General Letitia James, the same woman who built her brand on taking down Donald Trump, has now been indicted herself for mortgage fraud. A federal grand jury in Virginia handed it down yesterday, and already the political world is on fire.
Today indicted New York Attorney General Letitia James on a fraud charge. James was indicted on one count after a mortgage fraud investigation.
Letitia James, once held by Democrats as the fearless crusader for justice, now says this entire thing is a bogus case manufactured by Trump's Justice Department allies. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because we've heard it all before, just from the other side of the aisle. But it's very, very interesting that they never bring up Sam Antar, who brought this case to the forefront, a known Democrat. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Nellie Miranda. According to the indictment, James allegedly made false statements on mortgage documents for a Virginia property that she bought with her niece back in 2023. The claim is that she listed it as her personal residence, even though she had no plans on living there, because in order to hold her current position, she has to live in New York. And even if that weren't the case, she just had no intentions on living there, period. It was for her niece. But that small detail allegedly saved her thousands of dollars in loan interest.
This investigation into me is nothing more than retribution. It's baseless. It has to do with the fact that on a power of attorney, I mistakenly indicated that I was a state of Virginia, but prior to that, I had indicated to the mortgage broker that, in fact, in bold cap letters, that I am not a resident of Virginia and never will be. And in the mortgage application, I indicated that I would not live in Virginia and I was not a resident. They just took the power of attorney and they're using that as a basis for enforcement for their investigation, when in reality, the power of attorney was never used to determine my eligibility for a mortgage for my niece for a home in the state of Virginia. My niece who has children, and because I am a good aunt, I wanted her to have a home.
She says it was just an error on a form, that she corrected it and never deceived anyone, but prosecutors say otherwise. The Department of Justice accuses her of knowingly lied to the bank to secure favorable mortgage terms. And that's not only embarrassing for the woman who claims to fight for the people day in and day out, it's a felony.
Federal grand jury in Virginia has indicted New York Attorney General Letitia James on criminal charges after an investigation by the Department of Justice.
Chanley Painter has the details. Good morning, Chanley.
Hey, good morning. So New York Attorney General Letitia James facing federal mortgage fraud charges after prosecutors say she falsely claimed a home in Virginia as her second residence while using it as a rental property. A federal grand jury finding that she was then able to obtain more optimal loan terms. Well, James now faces a 2-count indictment, including 1 count of bank fraud and 1 count of making false statements to a financial institution. Each count carries a potential sentence of up to 30 years in prison and up to $1 million in fine and forfeiture.
This is nothing more than a continuation of the president's desperate weaponization of our justice system, that his only goal is political retribution at any cost.
Critics of President Trump say he called on the Justice Department to bring charges against James as retribution for previous lawsuits she brought against the commander-in-chief during his first term, something that those in the administration and federal prosecutors, of course, deny. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia say this, quote, "No one is above the law. The charges as alleged in this case represent intentional criminal acts and tremendous breaches of the public's trust. The facts and the law in this case are clear, and we will continue following them to ensure that justice is served." James is set to be arraigned on October 24th. Guys, back to you.
Yeah, you're not supposed to say untruths to banks. Yeah. Thanks so much.
And you really can't talk about weaponization when you have a person that campaigned on getting Donald Trump and then did it once they became the attorney general. I just don't have the appetite to hear about.
She would sit in the court, kick off her shoes, and just watch the whole trial every single day.
Now, let's take a step back. This is the same Letitia James who spent years calling Donald Trump a con man. The same AG who stood on courtroom steps boasting about holding him accountable for fraudulent business practices. And now here she is, facing her own fraud charge. If irony were a crime, she'd get a second indictment. But remember that civil case that she led against Trump's company? The one where she said, "No one is above the law."
My message is simple. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how much money you think you may have, no one is above the law. And it is my responsibility and my duty and my job to enforce it. The law is both powerful and fragile. And today in court, we will prove our case. I thank you all for being here. And again, justice will prevail. Thank you.
Well, now, conservatives are saying the same thing. No one is above the law. And if that standard applies to Trump, it applies to her too. And we are hoping justice prevails. The left is already crying foul, saying that this indictment is pure political retribution and that the Justice Department is doing Trump's bidding. But here's the thing. Those same people cheered every single time Trump, his family, or his supporters got indicted. Now, suddenly, they have rediscovered due process. MSNBC reported that the jury only took 1 day to look at the facts and find her guilty, as opposed to reviewing cases for weeks. That just goes to show how blatant the alleged fraud appears to be.
Tish James, we have now heard the news that New York Attorney General Letitia James has been indicted. Carol Leonnig.
Yeah, a few minutes ago we confirmed that she was indicted by a grand jury in Alexandria of at least one count of bank fraud, Nicole, and the return was rather speedy. 4 o'clock was when the grand jury was supposed to come back out and present their information to Halligan. There was a 4-person in the courtroom along with Halligan, and they released their decision. I will tell you there's one other really interesting element to this that I'm hearing from sources, which is that this grand jury made its decision and listened to the presentation on its very first day in the box. In other words, grand juries sit sometimes for weeks and weeks. This grand jury was impaneled today, and this was their first case and their first decision.
What's fascinating is the tone coming from the media. Outlets that used to paint James as the fearless truth teller sounds like defense attorneys. It was a clerical error, small mistake. She didn't mean to. Can you imagine if Trump said that? They'd be setting up tents outside of Mar-a-Lago. But here's Letitia James in her own words speaking on the indictment.
This is nothing more than a continuation of the president's desperate weaponization of our justice system. He is forcing federal law enforcement agencies to do his bidding. All because I did my job as the New York State Attorney General. These charges are baseless, and the president's own public statements make clear that his only goal is political retribution at any cost. The president's actions are a grave violation of our constitutional order and have drawn sharp criticism from members of both parties. His decision to fire a United States attorney who refused to bring charges against me and replace them with someone who is blindly loyal not to the law, but to the president, is antithetical to the bedrock principles of our country. This is the time for leaders on both sides of the aisle to speak out against this blatant perversion of our system of justice. I stand strongly behind my office's litigation against the Trump Organization. We conducted a 2-year investigation based on the facts and evidence, not politics. Judges have upheld the trial court's finding that Donald Trump, his company, and his 2 sons are liable for fraud. I'm a proud woman of faith, and I know that faith and fear cannot share the same space. And so today, I'm not fearful. I'm fearless. And as my faith teaches me, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. We will fight these baseless charges aggressively, and my office will continue to fiercely protect New Yorkers and their rights.
Let's be real. Mortgage fraud is serious. You don't accidentally misstate occupancy on federal loan documents. You either live there or you don't. And this isn't her first property controversy. She reportedly listed her Brooklyn property as a 4-unit property when it has 5 units, raising questions about whether she misrepresented that too. So the question becomes, is this really about justice? Or is it political warfare coming full circle? From where I see it, it's poetic justice. But even when justice catches up to a Democrat, the left will always scream political retribution and claim that the timing is suspicious, especially since the indictments come just 2 weeks after James Comey's own indictment. And also the firing of Eric Siebert, who claimed that he could not find any evidence of fraud to indict Letitia James. And you know, Chris Hayes has something to say about it.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. New York Attorney General Letitia James has been indicted by Donald Trump's Department of Justice on 1 count of bank fraud and 1 count of false statements to a financial institution. Now, this is one of those situations where basically everyone in the political world, anyone who's watching the news develop, saw this coming. And the reason is that the President of the United States explicitly, in writing, directed the Attorney General to indict his political opponents on obviously trumped-up charges. 19 days ago, Donald Trump posted this message on social media, quote, "Pam, I have reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time, all talk, no action. Nothing is being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is being done," adding, quote, "We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now, President DJT." At the time, given how brazen that was, there was speculation that it must have been meant as a private directive to his AG to go after his enemies using the full tools of the Department of Justice. Well, now we know it was. According to the Wall Street Journal, quote, Trump meant to send a private message to Attorney General Pam Bondi urging her to prosecute former FBI Director James Comey and his other favored targets, according to U.S. officials familiar with the matter. Trump believed he had sent Bondi the message directly, addressing it to Pam, and was surprised to learn it was public, the officials said. Public or private, the message was received.
But here's where we have to stay grounded. If Letitia James truly broke the law, then she deserves due process. Conservatives shouldn't do what the left did with Trump and declare guilt before trial. Although the optics are undeniable, this is the same woman who said that Trump's businesses lied to banks. The same woman who made her name claiming no one was too powerful to face accountability. And now that same slogan might be etched on her own indictment. And from the documents that I've read, it looks like fraud to me. And lying to the banks for favorable mortgage terms is fraud. But you have to ask yourself, if this were a Republican AG, say in Texas or Florida, would the media be describing it as an innocent mistake? Or would they be calling for their resignation, impeachment, or exile to the moon? The hypocrisy is the real story here. For years and years, Democrats weaponized the legal system against their political opponents. And now, one of their own is feeling the sting, and suddenly fairness matters again. Suddenly, the justice system is politicized. Please spare us. There's also a cultural moment happening here, a breaking point in trust. When you indict a sitting attorney general, you're not just prosecuting a person. You're putting an entire ideology on trial. For conservatives, this might feel like karma. For Democrats, it's panic time. But for the rest of America, it's just another reminder that our justice system has lost credibility across the board. The elites live by one set of rules, and regular citizens are forced to live under a different set of rules. Whenever a politician is indicted, fined, or even imprisoned, they have already largely benefited from their fraud. So regardless of the punishment, sometimes it's minuscule in comparison to what they've gained. Letitia James once said, "Power must be held to account." She's right. And now that test has come to her doorstep. Whether she's found guilty or not, this indictment will define her legacy. Not as the slayer of Trump, but as the latest example of what happens when politics becomes the weapon and truth becomes collateral damage. So as this story unfolds, stay skeptical, watch the evidence, and do not let the media spin this into another morality play. Accountability must cut both ways. And maybe, just maybe, we're finally seeing the beginning of that. What do you think? What message does this send to Americans watching politicians play judge and jury on their opponents. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if honest commentary brings you value, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, and ring the little bell so you never miss an update. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.